Welcome to Valhalla Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Becky Hill, otherwise known as Soul Chaser Becky, and I am a proud Viking geek. I fell in love with the history, culture and mythology of the Viking Age, and I have been on an endless quest for more ever since. Join me as I discuss all things Norse with those who have been inspired by Viking Age history and Norse mythology in their creative works, or those who have studied the sagas and archaeology, and review how such subjects are being presented to modern audiences today. If you like Viking stuff, you are welcome in my Valhalla, and I hope you stay for the conversation. Welcome everyone to Valhalla Conversations podcast, and I'm delighted to say today is a special day for two very exciting reasons. One, we have a return guest. That's right, he didn't get enough of the mead in Valhalla last time, so he's come back for a second round. And I'm delighted to welcome Joshua Gilligan back to the virtual hall.
Hi Becky, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm so glad to have you back because we are here to talk about something very, very exciting. And I've been following it on your various socials and platforms for a while, which is a new board game. Well, say board game, card game, I should say. You've got coming out called Halls of Valhalla, and it's connected to the wonderful logo on your t-shirt, Little Hammer Games, which you are now deeply involved with as kind of like a creative in the sphere of Nordic stuff. So I guess we should begin with kind of like, as we talked to you, it was about All Thingy, the card game, and the Crescent and the Northern Star, and of course the Gatewatch trilogy to be, hopefully, is still waiting eagerly for the third book, which I highly recommend our viewers go back and listen to that episode and then buy all those wonderful things. But now you're in Little Hammer Games, fully and absolutely embodied in it. So tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Well, so glad to be back on, and I will take every chance I can to nerd out about Viking stuff. And there's none better than you here in your hall. And so, yeah, very glad to be back. Little Hammer Games. So Little Hammer Games is sort of the imprint of some of my game design stuff. So I published, as you mentioned before, All Thingy One Will Rise, which is a card game set in Viking Age Iceland. And so I was sort of the designer on that one. That was my design credit, and it's listed on the box as in association with Little Hammer Games, but I wasn't the publisher. I was just the design credit. So we worked back and forth. They were great to work with. They're a massive publisher. They do all sorts of things, magazines and board games and stuff like that. This new game, Halls of Asgard, is a foray into taking on a role of a publisher too. So I'm kind of doing everything. Like I designed the game. I worked really closely with the artist, and you would recognize her artwork right away. It's very distinctive. We'll have to sing her praises a bit later. But essentially, yes, Little Hammer Games is about to launch with this new project, Halls of Asgard, which is a board game that is firmly set within mythology, which is my personal favorite area of Viking history and myth. So I love the historical stuff. It was really neat to kind of work with a historically based game, which then spawned the expansion and the anthology that we had also chatted about. But this is a new project, and it's firmly set within the Norse myths. So yeah, that's Little Hammer Games, and things are about to launch. We'll see how the Kickstarter goes, but I'm hopeful that we can get this project off the ground, and that will lead to many more Viking things.
Wonderful. Well, to whet the appetite of our listeners and viewers, depending on what platform you're listening or joining us into our virtual hall, I will read to you currently the blurb of the Halls of Asgard game, and then I'll give you the exciting news, which is it's going live imminently. So the Halls of Asgard is a semi-cooperative social strategy game for 3 to 6 players, about 25 to 45 minutes, with absolutely stunning hand-painted art by the celebrated Norse mythology artist, and I did recognise her, Helena Rosova, because she did the covers for your Gatewatch duology, yet to be a trilogy. Looking in on the lighter side, it's a greater starter for those new to board games with an easy setup, a simple mechanic that can generate surprisingly intricate cooperative strategies and guaranteed memorable times. Love that line. The semi-cooperative aspect lends itself to a delightful tension between defeating Hela, the goddess of the Norse underworld, and outdoing your fellow Asgardian gods. So, dear viewers and listeners, each player takes on the role of a god. You can have Odin, Thor, Freya, Heimdal, Idun, or Loki. I salute you for putting in the goddesses there, sir. Well done. With 2 unique powers and 1 unique curse. Interesting. gazing down at the mortals passing through the life stages, either child, warrior, or elder, on the Midgard board. They use their powers to claim heroes that join them in their hall in preparation for Ragnarok. And along the way, Hela claims mortals off the Midgard board and gains all those who die without honour or glory of old age. A unique clan mechanic and differing moral values of 0, 1, or 2 adds an extra element of strategy as gods collect their heroes. If one of the gods can defeat Hela through the strength of their gathered warriors, the gods win. Hurrah! However, if Hela ends up with a higher strength score, all players lose as Ragnarok sets the 9 realms aflame. Dun dun dun! And that Kickstarter, guys, is now live! So I will be going off after this recording drops, and I'll be putting my penny's worth in because I would like a game. I don't know when I'll play it or who I'll play it with, but I would like a copy because the artwork is gorgeous.
And I have a major regret now, Becky, that you just threw that introduction, that I didn't get you to do my Kickstarter video. You should have like scripted you should have been the narrator for my script. It would have been like, oh yeah, come on through the door here. That's great. It's like cinematic. But
that's very kind of you, sir.
Yeah. So that's a really nice little summary capture of the game. I'm happy to start with whatever you want to. We can talk about like the game mechanics and how the game works, or we could get into the juicy mythological stuff. What do you want to get going with?
Well, I always like to start at the beginning, like the beginning of the creation myth. So what is the creation myth for you for this game? Where did the idea first pop into your head that you're going to have gods versus hell and numbers of warriors involved?
So this began a long time ago. I actually just started developing this game in 2016, which is almost 10 years ago, and it sort of developed in spurts and stages, and it was actually the very first game I ever started working on. I designed other games after this game that were published before it. So it's interesting, the sequence of published games for me is not going to be the same as like when they were originally thought of or designed. But I really love this idea in the myths and in Viking culture of like you're reared or like your fate. And so the original game was going to be something where there's these Viking heroes kind of traveling through the world, and then the gods were sort of looking down on them from the top. That's going to be the players, and sort of intervening to tweak their fate, to push them in one direction or another. And so that was sort of the original concept of the game. The original game was actually called Wyrds, like WYRDS.
Yes.
And it was a neat concept, but as it started to evolve and develop, I really started to lean more into the Asgard side of things, like the gods and their powers, and making it more about the gods than about the heroes. The heroes still play a central role. That's the central scoring mechanism in the game. But the original focus had kind of been on the warriors and their story and how they go through these epic things they do, with the gods kind of adding a little bit here and there. And now the final version of the game, Halls of Asgard, is very much you take the role of a god and you are embodying that god, and you are looking down on Midgard and trying to collect warriors in your hall. And so, so it went through several phases of development. I started playtesting it. I think the first playtest was back in 2016 around Edmonton, back when I lived in Edmonton, which is a city in the prairies here in Canada. Since then, it's been all over the place. I've taken it to conventions and board game cafes, and so many people have had a chance to give some feedback on the game and put some things into it. So it's really exciting that it's finally kind of come to fruition. I think sometimes, you know this about books as well, but you read a book and it's polished and it's finished and it's beautiful, and there's the whole story just beautifully laid out for you. But that wasn't the creation process for most of these things. They're often quite messy. What you originally think it's going to be is not always what it ends up being, and you're surprised sometimes and you're frustrated other times, but the struggle and the glory, you know, it all comes together, and there it is.
Wow. I mean, it kind of boggles my mind how anyone invented D&D, let alone any other board game.
Magic, yeah.
Snakes and ladders and all the rules convinced with that, because like we still debate in our family play Snakes and ladders, do you start on 0 or do you start on 1?
Yeah, right, yes.
So it's kind of like, how did you find then kind of like, obviously I guess what you call the test play experience, like where you do take it to conventions and to workshops and get the feedback? Did you get some good feedback from those who maybe didn't have much connection with Norse mythology or knew about gods having or goddesses having other halls? Because there is evidence there in the sagas and poetics somewhere, because I do remember reading about someone talking about all the other halls that the gods have, not just Odin's, which everyone of course knows of. So what's that like?
And you make a really good point, is that, yeah, you're right. There is mention of other halls. In fact, every god in Asgard is sort of imagined has a hall. We might take a guess that this was bit of a reflection of
Mm.
Viking society, right? Where the powerful individuals would have their own hall and they would host events, and it was this big deal, and that was sort of a sign of their power and authority. And so in Grimnismal, there is a whole segment where Odin is been tortured by this human king, placed between two fires for 8 days. All sorts of fun things happen in the Norse myths, but he decides that's a great time to start reciting all of the different halls of the gods. And in that's actually one of the segments that are really heavily on, because a lot of the gods we don't know a ton about. And I really wanted to draw forward. Obviously, you got to have Odin. You know, you got to have Thor. Just draw forward some of the gods that might be lesser known to folks that are not as nerdy and deep into the Norse myths as maybe you and I are. So. With board games, same with my Althing game, that you're really kind of drawing on two crowds. There's like the board game crowd, and then there's the Viking history crowd for Althing, and the meeting of those two crowds is kind of where that project came to be. And so it'll be very similar here. There's like the board game crowd, people are coming at this because they love board games, and then there'll be people coming at it because they love like the Norse myths and the Viking history aspect of it. So both of those elements are really important in the development, but the fundamental concept behind it is this idea that if you've watched Vikings history TV show, if you've read anything Vikings, you probably know when you die a glorious death, you go to Valhalla, right? That's sort of what everybody knows. But if you dig into the myths, there is actually a line that specifically states that half of the warriors also go to Freya's hall, which is Sesfremir. Yes. And I got into some arguments with people at these playtesting sessions saying that Freya lives in Folkvang. And these are exactly the kind of discussions that I love nerding out about. But Folkvang is technically a valley in which Freya resides and rules over. But her hall is called Sesfremir. And so halls of Asgard identify the hall of each god. And so I kind of played with that idea in that not all the warriors go to Valhalla, but that the warriors, according to the myths, right, go to both Freya and Odin's hall, that maybe all the gods are trying to acquire warriors like Odin so that they can face Hela and all the horrors of Ragnarok. And so that's sort of the basis of the game, is that each of the gods is sitting in their hall, and they're looking down in the mortal realm, and they're kind of picking and claiming heroes off the board at different life stages to build up their own power. One thing that's interesting about this game from a board game playing perspective is there's a new type of game that's come up. I wouldn't say it hasn't existed for a long time, but it's become more popular as a cooperative style game. And so Pandemic was one of the first like really popular cooperative style games where you're actually working together as a team to accomplish something rather than against each other, like in Risk or Monopoly or classic board games. This game is a semi-cooperative and actually blends elements of both the cooperative and the competitive games that you might have played. So you've got this cooperative objective of trying to defeat Hela, because Hela, and I've just got to nerd out here and show a little bit of this artwork from Helena Rosova. There's our Hela. So she's causing all sorts of chaos and destruction in Midgard, and so you're trying to hold her back. She's gaining power as she takes mortals and steals them off of the main board away from the gods. But you are also a Norse god, and you're pretty proud. And so here's Thor here, and you're trying to be the one who's going to defeat Hela. So you're working together to defeat Hela, but you really want to be the hero that the sagas will be written about at the end of the day. And so there's this really interesting tension between working together to make sure that Hela doesn't get tokens off the board, but then also your divine wiles to set things up so that you get the most heroes and the most powerful heroes by the end of the game.
Now, of course, kind of like, I'm going to ask probably a more mechanical question now, because I'm curious kind of like how many turns, if it is based on a turns kind of like strategy, is kind of like, will the game revolve, wrap up in? Because of course I'm thinking to very simple board games that I play with my daughter, Naomi. And I know we've got one called Rollosaurus, and she loves to win that one because she gets a little golden dinosaur card at the end.
Yes.
So it's making me think kind of like, how do you signal Ragnarok? How do you decide which god has won? And do they get anything out of it besides the glorious title?
Absolutely. And so the whole game is really interesting. So here's our Midgard board. I'm going to try to hold things up here a little bit. Here's our Midgard board, and Midgard, of course, is like Earth, where we live. It's the realm of the mortals. And we've got 3 phases: the child, the warrior, and the elder phase. And there's these tokens, our hero tokens.
Oh, wow.
Midgard. So you're literally watching the heroes sort of progress through Midgard, and there's a pool of tokens. Once that pool of tokens is moved through Midgard, the game's over. The number of Yeah, it'll depend on the number of players. It plays 3 to 6 players, and so you can actually play up to 6 players, which is nice because a lot of board games only play 4 max. But the number of rounds will depend on how many players. However, there'll be more rounds in a 3-player game, but it'll go faster because there's 3 players. And there will be longer rounds in a 6-player game, but it'll have a similar playtime because there'll be fewer, the same number of tokens are going through, right? And so our hero tokens all come from different clans and so on. So we got some beautiful artwork here. We've got the horse clan here. We've got the bear clan, and we've got the raven clan. And
ravens, of course. Have to have a raven with just mythology.
Right? Yeah, and Hela's done such a great job. She's got such a great background in like design styles, and so she's got them with all the different kind of Norse motifs. But on the back, all the warriors also have values. So a standard warrior has a value of 1.
Yeah.
And a heroic warrior has a value of 2. And of course, not everybody's a hero. There are also heroes that on the back have a value of 0. They are cowards. And so you might unwittingly pick up a coward by accident, and that is something that you may have to deal with. But all warriors are useful in some way, because there's also from the mechanical perspective, a clan bonus. If you get 3 members of the same clan in your hall, you get an extra set of bonus points. And so for every set of 3 you get, that can increase your final power and score. So yeah, I don't really get too far into the weeds of the mechanical details of the game, but that's sort of a nice little overview. It's like you're a god, you've got powers, you're messing with the mortals, trying to pick them up and pull them into your hall, building up your army while everybody else is trying to do the same, and then using your powers either cooperatively or maybe not always so cooperatively if somebody stabbed you in the back or promised they would do something and didn't. And that's kind of where the fun and the memorable aspect of this game comes through.
Oh, well, thank you for those peeks of like the actual parts of the game, the substance of the game. And if the viewers and listeners on, I say listeners, on audio platforms, come over to YouTube. You're missing out on all the goodness.
Yeah. Or go visit the Kickstarter page. Yeah.
Yes. I haven't quite branched out too much beyond YouTube for visual podcasting, but we're happy with the places that we are slowly infiltrating. And slowly being discovered. It's very slowly, but it's there. What else was I going to say? Oh, that was what I was going to say. So I want to know more, if you divulge very kindly to me and viewers and listeners, about the powers and the curses of these gods and goddesses, because I'm very curious. Like, I can't think of a curse for Freya besides just being too beautiful.
Oh yeah, that is a curse that you must bear. But so this is one of the funnest parts of the game for me, because once again, from the game player's perspective, it's a semi-cooperative game. That's an interesting fact. It's also asymmetric, which means that every player has different powers. In a game like Monopoly, it's and I use Monopoly only. I don't think that's a terrible game from a board game player's perspective, but it's a good example of people know it. Everybody has the same. The only thing that's different in Monopoly is their little characters that are moving around the board. Yeah. Everybody has the same abilities. Everybody has the same powers. Everybody has the same objectives. In Halls of Asgard, it's asymmetric, so every single god has a unique set of powers and a curse. And this is where I really got to dig into like the myths and make these like really deep references to each of the different characters. I intentionally set it up so that you don't have to know Norse mythology to play this game. You can enjoy this game for just a board game if you have no background context. You can just say, "Ooh, what pretty art!" Play it for the mechanic, and it's tons of fun. But if you are a fan of Norse mythology, and I have to credit Hela with this too, she added all these extra little elements and layers that I was picking out as she was sending me in the draft art, that are just little tiny hints and nods to different saga references and things there. So I will let you pick a god, and we'll dive into that one, Becky. Which one do you want to do? Odin, Thor, Freya, Heimdal, Eden, or Loki?
No, might as well go for Freya. Freya, of course.
Let's do Freya. Okay.
Too overlooked as a powerful leader in her own right.
Absolutely. So here's Freya, okay, and she's got 2 powers and she's got a curse. All the cards have a similar layout, so they'll have the sort of character illustration, and then they have their hall with the names, the Sesrum here, and they have spaces for all their tokens. The children and elders are kept in one section, and the warriors are kept in another section because they're actually worth more points. Originally in the game, I had like token spaces, like little circles, but Hela actually worked the token spaces into the artwork. So for all of them, they're like actually an integrated part of the artwork. And so we've got 2 things here. I'll see if you can read that one or maybe guess what those ones are. The one is she's crying. What does Freya cry?
Oh, she cries tears of, I want to say gold, but then I want to say amber at the same time.
Correct. So one of her powers is tears of gold, and so Hela has this beautiful illustration of Freya just like weeping these tears of gold. And what tears of gold allows you to do is when you go to claim a warrior, you have to roll the dice. you have to hit a certain number in order to claim the hero. Tears of Gold allows you to re-roll that dice. And so if you roll a low number and you're not happy with it, you can use your Tears of Gold power to re-roll that roll. Tears of Gold as a reference to the mist. This was something that was very commonly known about Freya, and if you know anything about Freya, this is probably one thing that you know. If you're into Viking stuff, is that she would cry tears of gold, and there was a lot of kennings. So instead of saying gold in a Viking poem, they would often say Freya's tears, and it was very commonly understood that that just meant gold. And Vikings loved doing this in their poetry, these little riddles that hinted at the myths. And so there's all sorts of other interesting kennings, and there's double kennings that are like references to references. But Tears of Gold is something that you really know. Now, you might think that her other power has to do with the beautiful necklace Bring Summon, but I actually took it a different direction. I had her second power to be Valshamar, which is the Norse word for her falcon cloak. And yes,
that detail.
Freya has a whole assortment of really awesome, cool things in her arsenal, which Loki is always trying to quote unquote borrow for whatever Loki's up to. And yes, and so Freya's falcon cloak is the other power that she has, and there is no mechanism in the game for gods exchanging heroes, like trading them back and forth, except for this.
Okay.
So Freya's sort of in charge of all the trades because she's got this falcon cloak that can allow players to trade. So if she wants to trade with somebody, that's easy. They can trade as long as the other person wants to. They can make that happen. But if other people want to trade, they have to come to Freya saying, Freya, please let us use your falcon cloak. And
Oh,
she can kind of deal with them and say, well, I'll let you use my falcon cloak if such and such and such. So there we go. So those are our two powers, and once again, they're really from a mechanical standpoint, you don't have to understand any of the background story, but if you understand the myths, you realize this is really cutting into what we know about her and digging into that. And then, of course, the curse. Must have the curse. And so her curse is gold lust. And we know this about Freya, is that she loves treasures and she loved gold. And she does all sorts of things to get more wealth. And so her curse is that Ragnarok, she must have one member of each of the 4 clans, or else she loses points at the end of the game. And so other gods are just sort of collecting whatever might be convenient, still trying to get the set bonuses, still trying to get the powerful ones. Freya has this additional challenge that she must also collect one member from each of the clans, or else pay the penalty. So, but that's one example. And like I said, we've got a few other references in here. You can see in Hela's lap, she's petting a cat. We know that Freya was carried around by a chariot pulled by cats. And so Hela just has such a deep insight into the myths. So much of her work is centered on that she was just brilliantly able to tie in all these amazing little Easter eggs for anybody who's into Norse mythology.
Oh, that's wonderful. I completely forgot about the kind of like the feather cloak. And of course, as you say, kind of like her lust episode with 4 dwarves to get Brisinga men all along. Just
like the party,
kind of like her connection to treasures and all things shiny. All right, then let's go to Loki next.
Okay, fantastic. Let's do it. So Loki's always a crowd favorite, and I have to warn you, this is in the rules as well. Loki is the most difficult card to play, so it's not in the suggested like first time playthrough. You're welcome to play obviously whatever you wanted to, but the first time playthrough does not include Loki because Loki, and we can see him here, such a handsome fellow, is a little bit tricky to operate because you need to know all the other gods' powers, and you need to influence them to let you use their powers on their behalf, on your behalf. So for Loki, well, once again, we've got all sorts of little references tied in here. One of them is sea, which is translates to magic, but I've translated here as to shapeshifter. And so Loki's known for changing forms. So what shapeshifter allows him to do is to use another god's power. The catch is, the catch is though that god has to give him permission. If they don't give him permission, then he can't. And so Loki is spending the entire game going around saying, "Oh, Thor, please let me use your hammer. Oh, Freya, can I use your cloak? I promise I'll use it for good and not for bad." And so this is a really interesting dynamic in the game because you're not really able to directly influence things in a way like Thor, who's just very straightforward. He's like, add points to the roll or stop another god from doing something. He's just one stop and it's done. With Loki, you're always having to scheme in the background and trying to find the alliances and find ways to make things work out for you. So that's his first power. His second power is trickster. Obviously, we know Loki is constantly getting himself into and then hopefully out of trouble. And so what Loki can do is if a hero gets claimed off the board, Loki can swap that hero for one in his hall. He can kind of steal that hero and swap it for another one. And so this has to do with A, getting strong heroes, and B, with the set collection mechanic. That's going to be really important because he can sort of influence and control that. Now he's got to be careful though, because if he takes somebody's hero, they're probably not going to let them use his powers, use their powers. And so he's got this really fine balance, and all the characters do, in terms of wanting to work together to defeat Hela, but also needing to kind of fulfill their own goal too. So, and then his curse drips of venom. We know that's a reference to Ragnarok. Loki's luck runs out eventually, and he's in an underground cave. He's bound with the intestines of his own sons, and a serpent is tied on a rock above him to eternally drip, this kind of a radioactive poison onto his bare flesh. Very pleasant. Anyways, if Loki rolls a 2, sort of like snake bites, if he rolls a 2, then no god can intervene to help him. He loses his turn, he fails his claim. Whereas in every other part of the game, if a god gets a bad roll, they can always call on the other gods to come and help them. But if Loki rolls a 2, that's his curse. He can't. The gameplay passes on, and he can't get any help. So.
His luck runs out. That is really inspired. I really like his work, like how he made the 2 kind of like goes with the 2 dots on the kind of like a Numicon dice. That's what we call in the UK, where he's doing dots as numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, with the fangs. I really like that. It's inspiring.
And I really want to stress, if any of this sounds complicated, there's some really interesting things that you can do with it, but the gameplay itself is not extremely complicated. It's very approachable. It's quick to learn. The rounds go quickly as well. But if you really get into it, you learn the characters and the powers, you can have a lot of fun with it. And there can be some really surprisingly intricate strategies. There's a few playtests where a roll would happen, and one god would trigger a power to save the roll, and another god would intervene to undo the thing that just happened, and another god would intervene, and there would be like 6 or 7 powers would get triggered and sort of work all together in order to either have this roll succeed or not. And there's different levels of the game. So the beginner level, Hela's a bit weaker. In the more advanced version, she's stronger. And depending on whether you play the weaker or the stronger version, how experienced the players are, the gameplay itself ends up being more cooperative, more competitive. And it's really fun for me as a designer to see a group of people play it once and then play a second time. Because if they beat Hela in the first time, they think, oh, we're so great, we're so grand, we can just work for ourselves. And then they get smoked in the second game because they're not working together enough. And then vice versa, if they get beaten the first game and they're sort of like nipping at each other, and kind of being goofy and interrupting people and stuff like that too, and not working together, then the second game, then they're in a panic. Like, oh, we got to beat Hela the second time. Let's work together. Let's be super cooperative. And so, I love the story that gets told at the table, and how people kind of embody the different gods, because the powers really do inspire you to act a certain way, right? Like Loki kind of has to be a bit scheming and a bit like a bit of a salesman. Thor is kind of like staunch and is, people will call on him to use his hammer to boost their roll, but he also has a power where he can stop other gods from using their roll. So if Loki's up to no good and causing nonsense, Thor can just kind of put his fist down and stop him from doing what he's trying to do. So it's really neat. It's been a ton of fun. And I have put this out to people in terms of like, is there a game that's like very similar? A lot of times you'll say like, oh, it's like, Ticket to Ride, but with this. And this really has some unique mechanics that are not overly complicated, very approachable, but that feel pretty fresh. And I have yet to find a game that feels similar to it. So.
Yeah, I mean, as we're talking about it, the only card game I can think of that it rings a bell with, and this is taking me back many years back before COVID, because it's a game I used to play with my first D&D group of friends, was Unstable Unicorns, because they had their own powers, but they also had their own ways of manipulating other players and taking other cards and whatnot. But I kind of like really, really am impressed with how well you actually reflect the dynamic of the Azir Pantheon, because they do also have to work together, but then they also are kind of like, they've all got their own agendas and schemes. And I mean, I keep thinking back to reading the first, I think it was a myth in, maybe it was in Kevin Crossley Holland's books, or a telling at least, of kind of like where Odin disguised himself and finds Thor across a river, and he decides to have an insults match with Thor. And I'm thinking, you're not really nice, are you, Odin? Really?
You're not very
Just
nice,
to do that
definitely.
to Thor.
And I don't think Thor ever figures it out too. He's not too bright,
No,
but
no.
but yeah, Odin seems to entertain himself by just like insulting his son for verses and verses and verses. So yeah, it's interesting you bring up the story and the translations. Actually, Kevin Crossley Holland's translation was the first one that really got me into the Norse myths. He does a great job of staying true to the myths, but also presenting it in a presentable way, because it can be really confusing. I think as Western readers, we're used to, and I know you're a big book fan as well, but we're really used to this narrative arc of the introduction and the building tension and the climax and the resolution. Our idea of what a narrative in a story is not reflected a lot of the times in the Norse myths. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that this was an oral culture. They didn't write books. They didn't do written histories. And so stories weren't just entertainment for them. That was actually their history. That's how they passed on their culture, their beliefs. And so we'll find examples. Well, we were talking about Grimnismal, where there's to the halls. It seems odd to us, and if this was a movie sequence, we'd be scratching our heads to have burn between two fires, and then he just goes on this rant about all the different halls that are in Asgard, listing them off and who lives in them. But this was a really common structure and is a common structure for oral societies. Information is not in books, right? We don't have textbooks. So we need to present the information somehow, and wrapping it in the narrative of some sort of story, often putting it in verse, which allows people to remember it more easily. If it's in rhythm and meter, if you miss a section, you can hear it, right? And so there's ways that they can make that easier to remember, easier to recall, easier to repeat accurately. And so, yeah, the stories that end up getting told there are interesting too. The Kevin Crossley Holland's translation is amazing, and I would just say to any listener who wants an introduction to the Norse myths, it's great. There are a lot of he has a great balance of like letting certain questions just remain unanswered, because you kind of have to while you read through the Norse myths. There's so many confusing things and things that don't really make sense. Like, for example, like, are the giants bigger than the gods? Are the gods bigger than humans? Like the size scale doesn't really seem to make any sense. And I will say, I think giants is a mistranslation into English. It's common standard, but I don't think that's really how the Vikings viewed the Jotun, who are from Jotunheim. We often call giants, and I agree on that too. But yeah. So anyways, if you want to go to the source on this stuff from the Norse mythology perspective, I think you may have some suggestions too, but I think it's tough to beat Kevin Crossley Holland's translation.
Yes, I've got his kind of like his penguin book of Norse myths, and then I've got his beautiful kind of like lino printed children's illustrated version, which I'm still waiting for Naomi to have patience or an interest in. I mean, she knows who Thor is, and she can name Mjolnir. But I did ask, it was kind of like, who does Thor use his hammer on? And she was like, I don't know. And I'm like, giants.
Yeah.
I didn't want to confuse her too much with her Jotun, because then she'll be asking me like, what's a Jotun? She's very full of questions at the but at the minute, as a clever 5.5-year-old she is. With her obviously going to a Church of England school, I don't know how much they'd be impressed or not if she started spouting about Thor and Odin and Loki for all the friends. Whilst they're trying to sing amen and hymns and kumbaya and all that jazz.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that, because in Canada here, at least I'm from Canada, and there is definitely been a resurgence of popularity of names like Thor and Odin. I see the kids in school, which is great and all. Whenever I see a kid named Odin, no, it's a beautiful name, I love it, but I'm also a little bit like, do you know anything about Odin in the Norse? He's not the most pleasant guy, but yeah, no, it's fun. So.
Well, I'm sure I've come across kids called Loki in the UK. I'm sure there was one in a nursery before she left. There was, in fact, I'm sure there was another kid called Thunder, but I can't quite say whether that was a Norse influence or just because they like the name Thunder. Exactly. But yeah. But the other thing I was going to point out was, especially the mechanic with Loki being a shapeshifter, and how, at least in this game, you've kind of allowed him to impersonate, shapeshift into other gods in order to use their powers. It made me think that actually, kind of like in the source material that we have, he never actually impersonates any of them. He's always shapeshifting into either a female form or an animal or just someone else entirely. He never actually impersonates anyone else, which is an interesting kind of view, or at least use, of shapeshifting.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I mean, the sort of the motif of Loki sort of like borrowing other people's tools or stealing them or whatever is pretty common. You're right. That is a really good point. I never thought about that. He doesn't actually impersonate other gods, which I think is a fairly common theme in myths in general, like just even outside of Norse myths, is a god appearing to be somebody else and then deceiving them. I know that happens all the time in the Greek myths. But one thing I will say, and you touched a little bit before on sort of the underrepresentation of the goddesses in Asgard, and so I really wanted to include goddesses as well. Obviously, Freya was the inspiration for this game in a sense, because that line about her receiving half the warriors was the inception of the whole idea of the game. There's Idun as well, who has the apples of eternal youth, and she's got some really interesting powers. She's a bit more of a difficult card to play as well, because her powers have to do with like regrowth and regeneration, and then you're often like regenerating other players, but you want to sort of use that with discretion to sort of benefit yourself or make sure that you're getting a good deal out of helping other people. But even magic itself, I mean, we have different understandings and concepts of gender and identity now, but in Viking times, it was very much seen that magic or seed was very much like a female domain and had a female energy to it, which is interesting because both Odin and Loki are constantly engaging in magic, trying to acquire magical items, trying to acquire magical knowledge, oftentimes like shape-shifting themselves, in Loki's case, into female creatures like the mare, who gives birth to Cyclops. And so yeah, there's a lot of background and context, and what's fun for me to see is some casual board game groups who've never read the Norse myths having fun with this game, and then also seeing people who like love Norse mythology and who are just sort of drooling all over the different illustrations and references like that too. So it's my hope that this game can maybe open up the door to Norse mythology for some casual board game, and can maybe bring some folks who love board game or Norse mythology into board games, because it's a really neat community too. So
yeah, I mean, the line about Freya, it's one I've been battling with personally, because as I may have told you or may not have told you in the past, or I've probably definitely named it in various episodes, I've been researching Valkyries independently in my own time, somehow blabbed my way into academic circles, and now they want me to write a paper. It's taken 2 years, but I think I've reached the finish line. I'm imminently waiting.
amazing.
The move from conditional approval to firm approval, and then it's done. But one of the feedback, both in the peer review and in the editor's feedback, was kind of like, you've mentioned how Freya kind of like claims half the dead. Where does this line come from? Can you name the actual source? I'm like, no, because none of the books that I've read that mention it name it either. They all say Snorri Sturluson mentioned it from a poem, but I don't find the name of the poem. And of course, Snorri Sturluson is now quite debatable as a source, because of course he was a man, a Christian, and he wrote it 200 years after everyone believed and told these tales all. He had his own agenda and he wrote them down, and that's why we have fewer tales of the goddesses and more of the gods, to put it simply, dear viewers and listeners. So a lot of the stuff that he was aware of and then didn't put in directly, we've lost to time and myth and memory. So we don't really know how much more of Freya had than kind of like as a balancing act with Odin, beyond those little snippets, and it's teasing us as historians and those with just gender interests in the future.
Oh, 100%. And also the recognition that, I mean, what we have even as materials, Snorri included, is, probably a fraction of a percent of all that would have been available at the time of the culture. And everything, like you said, is filtered through history. It's filtered through the lens of Christianity. It's filtered through like a male dominant lens. It's, there's so many things that we're missing. So we're really just, pulling at threads here. We don't have a full picture. I've got an interesting point of discussion for you, if you'd like, in relation to the game. So as I was going through and designing the game, we've got Thor. He's got his hall, and Bill Skillen there is the name of his hall. We've got Odin and Valhalla, obviously. Heimdal has a hall named Himmelbjörg. Idun has a hall named Idavall, and Freya is ancestral there. Loki. Where does Loki live? And I could not for the life of me. I have contacted academics. I've reached out to lots of my intelligent friends like yourself and other podcast hosts like Siobhan Clark from the Myths, Legends, and Lore podcast, which is also an awesome one you should check out. And I could not nail down if Loki had a hall or not. And I checked my references, my translations. I couldn't find anything. And so I had to settle on something a little bit. It's maybe not a full definition, but in the game, I made his hall. I called it Franling Hall. which is reference to Frowning Falls, which is the waterfall that the gods capture Loki in once he decide that he needs to be that he needs to be finished, and that they're going to find him and trap him. And so they find him as a fish jumping in the in the pool below Frowning Falls. And so I decided to make his hall Frowning Hall. So there's a bit of a creative license there, but I needed to give him a hall. So that was an interesting discussion point. I don't know if you have ever heard or have any idea of like a reference to Loki's hall, but I couldn't dig one up. So
no, I mean, I've read a number of what we call Norse fantasy books, which feature heavily on Loki, both from his good side and his bad side. And they always leave you questioning kind of like whether you do like him or you don't, but you kind of do equally, you kind of don't. But then you also kind of get why he is, because of the way he gets treated. Long story short, no, but I know they do all give him a hall because, of course, he married Sigyn, which is a very forgotten goddess altogether.
Yes.
But we know very, 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 very little about her, besides her name and the fact that she had 2 sons and was a devoted wife to Loki, even after they punished him with that snake. And she's the one there holding the bowl and catching the poison and then putting it aside and letting Loki writhe for a bit. But yeah, it's an interesting point. There is so much we would love to know more of. So much we would love to know more of. But in a strange way, I think this ambiguity, this vagueness, this lack of concrete definition, like Christianity, of course, has its Bible and has its Old Testament and New Testament and all the palms and all the prayers, and the Vatican's probably got tons more that they won't let anyone read for whatever reason. They've kind of like, because that came through very much a written culture, but the Norse pantheon and their beliefs and their practices and their religious or almost like folklore-esque, depending on how strong it was in different time zones. It didn't have that, so it did fade into time. And I remember kind of like, again, working on my Valkyrie article, and I was focusing very much on Brynhild and how very much she's depicted in modern day fiction, kind of like how we are trying to readdress the balance of kind of how she wasn't just an angry woman scorned by man and therefore led bloody betrayal and death, etc. How kind of like, at least in the Poetic Edda, there is kind of like at the end of her, there's a set of poetry before her, which is Helgi Hundingsbane, although there's 2 or 3 poems about Helgi Hundingsbane, because of course they had different versions, and so they wrote them down. All culture would edit and amend as it was told orally, because no Skalds probably ever told it the same. They didn't all have the same script, they just had their own addition, their own flair. But one mentions about how Helgi Hundingsbane and his Valkyrie lover Sigrun, when they died, they got reincarnated, and Helgi was named Helgi something else, but she got a new name of Kara. But of course, when these things were written down, we don't know who wrote them down, why they wrote them down, what era it was written down, how long ago it was written down. We know nothing. These anonymous people have a lot to offer, or a lot of questions to ask when we all find them in the afterlife and where the universe we go to next. And it kind of like said, oh yes, it's an old wives' tale about reincarnation. And Kara also had her own poem called The Song of Kara, but that is now forever lost. And I'm like, why have you mentioned this and not kind of like, where is the Song of Kara now? Why didn't you write it down? Why did someone not find it? And then just like, I mean, Brynhild, of course, did have her own poem in her own right, albeit set kind of like posthumously after the main events, called Brynhild's Hell Ride, because she goes down to hell to sort herself out and reclaims Sigurd. But I'm thinking she had a poem of her own, and then there's Kara, Sigrun, she had a poem of her own. Who knew how many of the poems there were of these kind of like warrior women, Valkyries, all goddesses alone, that we just don't know.
And this is why we need a time machine. Yes.
We do need a time machine, but then we'd probably all find out lots more that we're probably getting horribly wrong. But long story short, the ambiguity and these gaps are perfect for you as creatives and for authors and for artists, like the one you've got on the game, and of course the one that did, same one who did the covers on your lovely Gatewatch series. It's because we've got no one to tell us, no, they didn't do that. No, that's not true. We got history at least. It kind of tells how the real people lived. But in terms of mythology, it's like an open sandpit. You can build whatever you want and no one can tell you otherwise, which is why no Viking game is the same, no Viking fantasy book is the same. They've all got gods doing different things, but the same name, same personalities to a degree. And hence why I am just forever a Viking nerd, because there's so much more to explore.
It's bottomless. It's bottomless. There's no end to the yeah, exactly, explorations and the retellings. And you brought up some retellings of the story of Loki, kind of from your perspective. He's been a very popular character. You know, the Gospel of Loki. You know, there's kick things
Joanne
off.
Harris.
Oh, Joanne Harris, she's brilliant. And then there's been lots of other retellings too. But I think that's an important part of our engagement with these stories. It's not just like it's a static story that sits there and we watch it and we nod our head, we walk away. It's really a conversation, how we're engaging with them. And I think what we see in the myths is a reflection more of ourselves and our society and the problems and the challenges that we have. And I think that's the other problem too, is that, you know, when Snorri Sturluson was doing his translations, what he was seeing in the myths, how he's interpreting them, kind of what he was identifying as important or what he related to, had a lot to do with you know, the society and culture, religion, everything that was happening to him at that time. And so yeah, I think once we can get past the idea that there's this perfect static, you know, true 100% right version of all these things, and that this is sort of an evolving conversation. This is a piece of culture. This is something we've sort of worked even to modern day society. I mean, the Norse myths have showed up in so many different interesting ways. That's a more meaningful way to engage with this than trying to dig through and find that one, you know, solid piece of 100% true evidence. Though it is fun to do that and go in those rabbit holes and try to dig those things up.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we all kind of like know, dear viewers and listeners, I hope you can all agree now that Vikings did not have horned helmets. But equally, in terms of kind of the mythology, like I remember coming across many years ago an academic, and I've forgotten his name, it's off the top of my head, but he did like a whole massive book, literally. It did get published and it was like over £100 to buy academically. I'm like, no, as as it was. But he basically looked at all the literary evidence and found that basically Thor does not make lightning, and yet we all connect Thor with storms and lightning. And it's those things that we add on to them, that as you say, give relevance and meaning to our time now, such as you say, kind of like Loki has had a renaissance as a rise of an anti-hero, because anti-heroes weren't really a concept or an idea centuries ago. Kind of like, if you're a bad guy, you're a bad guy. And of course, that's why when he first turns up in the Marvel comics, he's absolutely kind of like dastardly evil and full of wicked lies and plans and epic monologues. He kind of like, I'll get you next time, Thor, and all that jazz. Like I recently, well, I say recently, it was some point, I think it was last summer, that I finally watched the Loki series that Marvel did. And I thought, I was actually really impressed by the end of it, because I thought that is such a deep dive into that character. And even when he's like in the office with Morpheus, and Morpheus kind of like, do you enjoy hurting people? Do you really? And Loki kind of like bats off in so many ways, and eventually just kind of like, okay, no, I don't. But then they hurt me, and it's not fair, and it's not nice. And kind of like, oh my gosh, he's just like a bullied child who just needs to
Yeah.
Oh, and it's putting ourselves or empathizing kind of like things that we relate to, such as kind of like bullying and power control and all that kind of, and being the odd one and being the black sheep and being different. And certainly kind of like with my research into Brynhild, kind of like the rise of kind of like the strong female character and shield maidens, but that's a whole other topic, because I personally stayed on the Valkyrie route because it's mythology and I can discuss it more openly. I don't know enough history to do touch on shield maidens confidently. It just helps all these additions, we connect them, help them transition through all this time, centuries after the kind of like that their religion as a whole has basically faded to dust. They're still being told, just like the Greek myths. And like I often say, kind of the Norse gods are effectively human. They just happen to have access to life-belonging fruit, but then that's why doctors recommend apples every day, I think. And very powerful toys, very nice magical items that help them do their magical things, because otherwise they would just be normal humans, I think.
Yeah. Well, and to quote the Havamal, I mean, kinsmen die, cattle die, but the reputation of a famous man lives on, right? It's like these myths are continuing to kind of reverberate through the centuries. And I think it's just because they're good stories and they're interesting characters, and they represent maybe something deeper than just the culture that they came from, but maybe, you know, the human experience. And I mean, now we're getting really deep into things, but yeah, no, I think there's a lot of reasons why folks like us get sucked into this and just can't learn enough or ever kind of get to the bottom of things. It's just sort of the fun and sort of the adventure. And you mentioned so beautifully about this idea of like embodiment and people sort of seeing themselves in the myths. And I think that's one of the neatest things of the game for me, was just to kind of see people kind of step into these roles, almost like, you know, you mentioned D&D, like a role-playing game, but, you know, in a sense, kind of playing out this story. And it's like, why don't the gods always work together? It's like, well, I'm not going to work with Thor because I wanted to use his hammer, but he wouldn't let me because he wanted to use it. And it's these little petty things that end up making these sort of like epic moments in the game where you know, maybe there's a betrayal, or there's, you know, somebody finally gives in and joins the other side, or decides to cooperate, or interrupts things. So yeah, we're creating little mini sagas here.
Well, it's a beautiful reflection of the way that Pantheon at least appears to work from all the different sources and retellings that we've had over the centuries. Like, I remember reading, of course, my favourite myth, which is the Lay of Thrym, involving Thor getting involved in the wedding dress. And they kind of like, they have this huge debate in the hall about what to do, because this giant's turned up and he said he'll build them a wall, but he wants Freya and the sun and the moon. And of course, Freya quite rightly doesn't want to go, and no one wants to see him the sun and the moon either. And even Loki doesn't really have an idea for it, but it's Heimdal who suggests Thor putting, and he goes, "You're not going to like it, Thor, but I have an idea." He goes, "All right, try me." And like, yeah, I don't like the idea.
I love how you put that with, like, I have an idea, you're not going to like it, but it's really funny.
So yeah, kind of like, it's because they have all got their own agendas and motives in the main. Of course, I think certainly kind of like in the way the Marvel Cinematic Universe has represented that pantheon, they've made Odin almost too palatable. For my taste, he's very much just an old granddad, really. Whereas in kind of like the main sources, he is so manipulative. I mean, he betrays Frigga, his wife, so many times it's ridiculous. But then the Greek gods do it just as much, so I can't really complain. But kind of like in modern Norse fantasy retellings that re-represent him, he often not just manipulative, but he's also cruel, and he's also kind of like super paranoid. He needs to know everything. It's why he's the god of wisdom, and he has to have all the knowledge. That's why he keeps a guy's head in a jar, because it's another way of gaining knowledge. But then I do sometimes find that they represent him kind of like, the paranoia kind of like is stemming because he knows the end is coming and he wants everyone to survive, but he can't. That's why he's doing all that he does to get the dead on. And I think that's one interesting thing that I definitely found within the books, or at least one particular book I was looking at in terms of Brynhild, which came out the year I actually got to go to Norway, which was The Valkyrie by Kate Hartfield, which I highly recommend anyone read. You don't even have to know who Sigurd the Fafnir Slayer is just to read it. It plunges you straight in. But it shows him almost like manically manifesting and encouraging humanity to do more and more wars, more and more battles, in order for him to get more and more warriors up to Valhalla. So he's kind of like not just the god of war, he makes war. He makes it happen. He's the trigger point. He's kind of like the ill-informed advisor, whispering into one king's ear and then doing the same to the next. So he's kind of like manipulating humanity on that level, as well as manipulating the gods in various ways and shapes. But yeah, the game absolutely sounds fascinating. I can't wait to play it. The Kickstarter is, as I said, now live.
Yes, we are live.
So I guess, touching on Kickstarter, have you got any stretch goals in mind, or is it clearly just getting the game out into hands?
So yeah, great question. So oftentimes, if you've ever backed Kickstarter, I'll just give a quick idea of how that works. Is it's a crowdfunding model, and in board games, this is really common, and it's not common in other industries. Even like book publishing, for example, it's usually the big publishing houses who are putting the big projects out. But in board games, it's really unique as a community. The biggest board games, the best board games, the ones that are the most popular, are being crowdfunded. And what that means is that people who play board games are going and saying, yes, this is a game I want to play. It's not being decided by some CEO in a boardroom somewhere that this will be the most popular game of the year. It really is kind of the power of the people, which is great. So the way a Kickstarter works is if you back a Kickstarter, you commit some funds towards the goal for a certain tier of reward. In this case, it would be the game, and that would fund the project so that it can get published, it can distribute it, and that you can get a copy in your hands. There is a time frame on these. I am ambitiously going to try to fund this and fulfill it within a year. That is my goal. That might sound like a long time, but Kickstarter projects, if you understand sort of how distribution, global trade networks work, can be fast. Kickstarters can take sometimes up to 3, 4, 5, 6 years to fulfill, which is frustrating from that end, but is really just the reality of how things are set up. And obviously, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of shifting happening now too. So, pending things going as smoothly as they possibly can, that will be the goal. Sometimes Kickstarters will have stretch goals. So we'll say if we get to a certain amount of money, we'll add this, we'll do that. I'm avoiding that only because, like I said, this project is going to kickstart Little Hammer Games. This is kind of the initial fledgling project, and I really want to keep things as simple as possible. So I'm calling it a no-nonsense project here. We're gonna get the game, we're gonna get it done. I'm not gonna add any fancy bells and whistles at this point in time. There might be future Kickstarters for perhaps expansions, additions, other games, but for now, I just really want to get this one up and running, get it into people's hands as soon as possible, and you can get yourself a copy if you back the Kickstarter, Halls of Asgard. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, the link will be at the bottom of this video in the description, so please go hit it, guys. Throw some money in. I mean, Kickstarter is quite user-friendly in that you can just throw money in without actually claiming the benefit of the products that you're supporting. So if you just like Joshua's work and want to keep him going, please do so. I certainly will. Because I have a collection of games, even like I have All Thingy, Modern Rise, even though I have no one to play it with, I still have it just because it's an awesome game and it's cool artwork. And at some point, I might be able to explain who these people are to my own, because of course it was based on historical figures, which is really cool.
That'd be great.
I guess we should, of course, as you say, give some credit and some airtime to the wonderful artists you've got doing all these amazing cards and the mats and the tokens and everything. So how did you first come across that?
So the internet, I don't know if it was Instagram or Pinterest or what, but this artist kept popping up and her work was sort of hand painted. It was so vivid. It wasn't traditional Viking style, but it had it was reminiscent of the different eras you may be familiar with, like gelling style and urn style and things like that. And I was fascinated. My head was so deep into this stuff. I immediately recognized, like, this artist has a much deeper understanding of sort of the art forms, of the myths, of the stories, of everything. And so she's got an incredible range of pieces, which you can find on, I think she has a website, DeviantArt is where I first found her, and she's got prints for purchase there. But it just scenes from the myths. So, for example, you mentioned from Thrimskvida, the scene where Thor dresses up as a bride to retrieve Freya's hammer. She's got an amazing series of images sort of depicting that, and she does an excellent job. I think she's got a soft spot for Loki. Loki always has a sort of place in a lot of her illustrations, but no, it was incredible. So she had done the covers for my fantasy trilogy about the troll hunters in Gatewatch. That's the 10-3 saga, and I loved her work. And this was quite a while ago that we sort of initiated this project, but I'd said, I'd love to do a board game with you. I love your style. Would you be interested? She heard the concept. She's like, I love this. This is cool. And so we worked on that for a few years, and now here it is. So I would say definitely worth checking out. I think her tag on DeviantArt is Helena, and we'll include a link maybe to that in the show notes as well.
Yes, we will, because we love supporting all creators of anything Nordic, and artists is definitely one of them. I know the few times I do get to go to a Comic-Con, not that there are many in the north of England now because of the way COVID shut lots of big things down. I always get excited when I find someone who does anything remotely Nordic. So not that I have an office or even a wall of my own. I'm currently sat in the corner of my lounge, not the Hela that you see behind me. Yes, this is the price you pay for having children. You have to give up any geeky space. So all my geeky stuff is in the bottom of my wardrobe, waiting for the day I can afford to hire my own office and make it my own studio. But that's a dream. That is a dream. Until I have my virtual Valhalla, so that'll do.
I love it. Yes.
So how long is this Kickstarter open for people to throw money in?
So yeah, it launches today. It's going to wrap up on April 30th. So we've got 24 days to make it happen. If we reach the goal, the project is funded, we're going to make it. And if it doesn't, then I go back to the drawing board and maybe return to it, maybe move on to the next thing. We'll see. But I'm hopeful we can make this happen. It's a smaller scale project as far as Kickstarters. And I'd encourage you, if you are interested in this kind of thing, especially board games, there's a lot of really neat stuff. It's also a bit of a dangerous game surfing around Kickstarter because there's so many awesome things that you might want to get your hands into and become a part of. But yeah, that's the campaign. So all of April here, we'll be running it starting today. And that's your chance. Once the Kickstarter is over, that's kind of it. So it's your chance to hop on board if this sounds like it's something that's up your alley, or if you have somebody in your life who, like Becky and I, are obsessed with Vikings and Norse myths and you've bought them all the other stuff. Well, here's something new. So.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like very much an alternative form of the actual game itself, in that we all have to join the hall before the doors shut.
Remembering heroes. Will you be a hero with me? Yeah, sorry.
So are you going to any conventions, game shows, anything like that during the Kickstarter launch?
Not during the Kickstarter launch. I was at Terminal City Tabletop Convention in Vancouver back in March. Had a wonderful time. Lots of awesome folks there. So I won't have boots on the ground anywhere here in April, though I might be making a little guest appearance at Calgary Comic-Con, but not in an official capacity as Littlehammer Games, just to go for fun. But yeah, no, main place to find it would be on Kickstarter. If you want to know more about the game and you feel like you haven't got enough of a sense of kind of how the gameplay works, there is an amazing rule video by Ryan from How to Play, whose channel is amazing board game coverage, rule reviews. He will give you an entire overview of how the game works, including the rules. There's also some other designer interviews. You'll find this one in one of the feature updates throughout the campaign as well. And there's a board game review from an Australian board gamer, Hodges, who's got banger.
Nice.
So yeah, if you want to learn more about the game, kind of see it on the table, see more of the art, check out the Kickstarter page, and there's some videos there where you can see not only images of the game, but some videos of how to play and stuff like that too.
Brilliant. Well, as I've said from the word go, I will definitely be throwing my penny's worth in, because I love you and I love your work, so it's all good. And I guess we're going to wrap this up because it's very late my time, albeit early afternoon your time. And we very much could talk about Viking stuff for absolute hours, Joshua, because we just connect on such a Norse level. But we will spare the ears and views of our viewers and listeners for hours and hours. But thank you so much for coming back to Valhalla Conversations podcast. I wish you the best of luck with the Kickstarter. I will do my little best to mention it in all my various platforms and circles. Not that I have that many friends who go for it, but you never know. All little helps, just spreading the word. And we will hopefully get a physical copy in the near future.
Woohoo. Thank you so much, Becky. Really appreciate having me on.
No worries. We'll hopefully see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed the discussions between my special guests and myself. Please do check out the episode blurb for links to their works and websites. If you liked this episode, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. Let me know if you learned something new in the comments. And of course, click subscribe to Valhalla Conversations wherever you are listening or watching. This podcast can be watched on YouTube and YouTube Music, and it can also be listened to on Spotify, Amazon Music, Podcast Index, and on rss.com. We hope you can join us in Valhalla again soon for more conversations.